Locho ya sampo pa gyu trashi pa tuche tempe tinle yar ngonda pelge drolor zampe ze parche palde lame shabla solvade Omo a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Omo a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Omo a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nishas Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nishasane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karma Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karma Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Kar Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Kar Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karm Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om a Guru Vajra Dara Suma Timo Nisha Uta Varda Nishri Badra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Dagi Jitsun Lama Tuje Che Nyamda Dala Tuje Sikso So Gebe Shesan Dala Tendo So Uyon Sunge Nawa Tsedo So Tsechi Nyingne Solwa Debe Tse Dechen Korlo Viso Lekshune Yila Sambe Dede Malupa Geme Lungi Drubra Chingelo Tsoni Sodan Diktun Shakpe Tse Dunge Namge Yinso Lekshune Labchen Tsonyi Yonso Tsopa Dan Chera Nyetun Chamra Chingelo Chancho Parge Nyinsen Tukun To Nyu Peme Siudru Lekshune Chancho Drube Gegen Kunshishi Tungen Dela Drubra Chingelo Dagi Lona Chola Chokpa Dan Chemi Samjur Ngemba Shiwada Chedan Tumbe Dedun Malupa Beme Lunge Drubra Chingelo dorna tengne tsira thamche dam techi pardone kaba tham reise kyamne lama khele me tukje chenge dala sikso sola gongyab drewe nyamda dachala chetson lame tuje rab gongne kudan sunge nawa dralme to nyam sunyongwe kesan tobrasho kewa kunto yanda lama dan drame chikipe la longche ching sada lamge yente rabzone dorje change koba nyur tobe sho pakyuke akudan dagi alu pakyuke sundan dagi nga pakyuke tukdan dagi chikto chingi alu makyuke kudan dagi alu makyuke sundan dagi nga makyuke tukdan dagi tenyer me chikto chingi alu Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Maham Shakyamuni Swaha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye druparasho Sangye chedan tsoge chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso chi Dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra sangye druparasho sangye chodan tsogi chonam la chancho pardo dani kyapso chi dagi jinso gibe sonam ki drola pinchra Sangye Druparasho. Nel Buddha, nel Dharma e nel Sangha prendo rifugio fino all'illuminazione. Con la pratica della generosità e delle altre perfezioni possa io ottenere lo stato di Buddha per il beneficio di tutti gli esseri senzienti. Haye ke dan lu dan nue chen ke drupa dan da mi ke nan dan drupa kun ke dran chi sam tam che ke tu da ge che ten to.
Good evening. When we study the part of Buddhist philosophy, the teachings called, let's say, more philosophical, Zen, and the part of debating and philosophy in general, there's one part at the beginning that describes the different spiritual paths towards enlightenment. And, and it's divided mostly into three types. Two paths follow one's own personal needs, and the third follows putting oneself at the service of others, called the Mahayana path. In the first path, it's more simple. Even if to be able to reach similar objectives, the first path, it's necessary to go beyond one's own ignorance with the development of wisdom. So one sees how to understand the interdependence among all phenomena, to see that the way that we perceive reality as if being autonomous, independent, is not coherent with reality, and be able to realize the true nature of reality. It's explained, though, for one's own personal path, one needs only to understand the nature of reality in some aspects. One doesn't need to look at different logics to get to the same. It needs to be valid for one's own path. These different logicals. But when we talk about being of benefit for others, it's said that the practitioner needs to be able to get to that same result, this so-called that this empty, the emptiness of inherent existence through thousands of different paths, different logics. Because when we need to adapt ourselves to others, we need to be able to see, we need to be able to understand others and see their paths. Instead, following one's own individual path, it's much easier, much more simple. When I have to face my own mental defilements and try to follow a path that corresponds, and I don't need to depend on others. I don't need to adapt myself to others, or I don't need to depend. It doesn't depend on how I interact with others, because effectively what we see that historically, great practitioners, meditators, for a certain part of their lives, what they did was to diminish interactions with others and spend a great part of their lives with themselves, if not without doing nothing, but with a path of reflection, study, and meditation, where one is with himself, or looking in his eyes, which is not easy. And with that, gradually being able to generate new habits and give oneself new directions. The fact that one follows his own path of growth, and which is something marvelous. It doesn't necessarily mean that he is skillful at helping others, because what happens is that, and there's a saying, and I don't remember from which language, says that sometimes we're so taken by by being right, that we're not able to see the view of the other. What happens is that each one of us, we have our own view of reality. Each one of us inevitably perceives every situation, every person, every place, everything through the filter of his own experiences, his own culture, or his own traumas, his own mentality, and even through his own physical state. I mean, of course, our physical state and astrological influences, we are influenced and we live reality in one way or another. We've talked about this many, many times, even if it's never enough. But the point is that we perceive reality through, as we've said so often, the filter of ourselves. And we try in our actions and in our ways of living to have a kind of correspondence between what we think, what we feel, and what we do, which already means a lot. Keeping this coherence is marvelous when we're able to balance and have this coherence between what I feel, my emotions, my aversions, my attraction, and then what I think is what is right, what should be, and what shouldn't be, what's right, what's wrong, and then what I do is marvelous. So we try to find this balance among these 3 points. And when we're able to have this balance among these 3 points, that already brings us to a state of, of, of balance and well-being, because when harmony between what I feel and what I think and what I do, when that is lacking, that increases that inner dialogue and this malaise and this internal non-coherence that increases that when there's the imbalance. So often we try to find our balance, with awareness or without. We try to find this balance, this harmony among what we think, what we feel, and what we do. If we don't all do it, it would just be something good to do. It's something let's say that we try to do. As I said before, that sometimes, we're just too busy with being right. Is that sometimes we're very busy with trying to create this balance between our worldview, our our point of view, and our feelings, and we're trying to put our interactions and our feelings in these, how can I say, within these parameters. What do I feel? What I feel, what I think. But if we took every person, regardless of, even if we have similar points of view or grew up in the same culture, or we share the same, a philosophical point of view, or we live in the same culture. I mean, in many aspects we can be very similar, but if we look at each one of us, we have emotions, feelings, expectations, traumas, aversions, attractions, and thoughts, conceptual thoughts that are very different one from the other. In some aspects we're very similar, but in other aspects we're very different one from the other. And what happens is, when we find ourselves in front of someone else, no matter how much conceptually know that the other person is different from us in many aspects, how can I say? Somehow, anyway, it's hard for us. We struggle to see that person because very often, anyway, we see the other person through this filter of our own feelings, our own concepts, to what I think is right, what I think, how I think it should be, how, etc., etc. Something that, and somebody could ask me, but how could you do differently? And there's no simple, direct, objective answer. You know, we do see others through the filter of ourselves. This happens, and from this comes the fact that every once in a while, it's not enough just to have a good intention, because when if, if, if I have like the best of intentions towards someone, no matter how good my intention is or how much love I feel for someone, it doesn't mean that my interaction towards you is something that is beneficial for you, that is good for you. You know, that also that can generate a positive interdependence with your mentality, with your needs. So why do we say, you know, why do we say that to be able to help others, I need to become a Buddha myself? Is because interacting with others is just not easy. Being able to really, being able to adapt our actions to the world view and the actions and the needs of others, not adapting in the sense that, in doing what the others want us to do, but adapting instead to interact so that it's the best thing for that person to create this positive interdependence. I've seen this many times with direct relationships, or even around me. I've seen it in different places, in Brazil, in India, in Italy, where regardless of how good an intention was, that action didn't bring a positive interdependence. And I think that we've all experienced something similar. It's true that the motivation is important, but as we are often reminded, it's not enough to have one wing to be able to fly. Instead, it's said that to reach enlightenment, we need method and wisdom. Of course, having a good motivation, having love and compassion is important, but we also need wisdom, being able to understand what the best way is to act. And what I see is that often, because when we need to choose how to act, our reference point very often is not the mentality, the need of the other person and that interaction that towards the other, but often our reference point are our own feelings, our own concepts. And if I see that my way of acting, it corresponds to what I think is right, then I follow that way, which is already a lot, but that's just not enough, because we live in a very complex reality. There are many of us. We interact with so many people constantly. And in this constant interaction, we're interacting with different realities. And what I can see is what's the most difficult is not loving everyone, but is knowing how to interact with everyone to be able to create this positive interdependence. It's not the most pleasurable way or the way to to give, make the most pleasurable experience for the other. Instead, it's about acting the most for the highest, for the best benefit. That's why we talk about wisdom, knowing what the best way to act is, how to what for oneself and for others. So I'm not expecting anyone from one day to the next or 1 year to the next that we're able to act in the best way towards everyone. But something that we can already do is to at least be aware that my needs are different than yours. Be aware that when I act, I need to at least try to adapt myself to your needs, to obtain what I want. What do I mean by getting what I want? If I want to benefit, if I want to act in a positive way, if I want to help you be well, if I want to have a good relationship with you, I need to adapt myself to your reality, not just me to you, but on all of us, with everyone we have around us. If somebody asks me, okay, Lama, that's, but then who's going to adapt himself to me? That's not your problem. Nor is it mine. Because it's not up to me to decide what others should or shouldn't do. It's not up to me to control or decide other people's behavior. I can choose to interact with one person or another or not. I mean, that has to do with my own ways of interacting, but I can't choose for others, how they behave. So who's going to adapt themselves to me? I don't know. Maybe many, maybe few people. I just don't know. But the point is that with the interaction that I'm creating, that's going to help me adapt myself to others. If if I want to transmit something, if I want to communicate something, then I need to transmit. I have to. Once I want to show you something, then I need to adapt to your reality. I need to adapt to you if I'm interested in interacting with others. Otherwise, not. And it's not an easy path. I think this is really one of the hardest things that there is. I remember one time we were together with Rinpoche. There were a few people. We were in Bishing. And Rinpoche was invited to dinner. I mean, it was really like a science fiction scene. There was this scene, there was this dinner, this kind of strange restaurant, nothing. There were people who had invited Rinpoche and me, and there was this whole story, people, things. I mean, it was just really, really different than my own culture, I'd say. I was very tired, Rinpoche too, and after a day of a very, very busy day, they said, okay, yeah, let's go for dinner, and we couldn't really understand what was happening at a certain point. There was like this comic who did all these imitations of like animals, and then there was this food that was just, for me, was just inedible. I couldn't understand anything that was happening, and I started to see that I and other people around me, it seemed to me like this, we started to lose our patience a little bit, because it was a reality that was so different from what we thought should be the way. different from how we thought people should act or how things could be, plus there was all of our fatigue. And at a certain point, Rinpoche was watching, and even Rinpoche had this amazing ability to transform himself to every reality like a chameleon. And in that context, he was more Chinese than any Chinese person there. And he just adapted himself to their way of being. And afterwards, in every context, I mean, I saw Rinpoche in many, many different contexts. I mean, it completely adapted to the situation, to the people, to the place. I mean, and this is a very, very special ability. Not that it's something that we can't develop, but we should look at it and say, this is something I want to develop. So you get to a context, and instead of imposing to others your way of being, you adapt to them. Our tendency, let's tell the truth. When we get there, we get somewhere, we get into a new context, or we meet somebody, we try to say, okay, yeah, we're adapting, we're listening, but very often, somehow, we are imposing our own view of things, even more when we think that we're right. I'm not saying that we shouldn't follow our own reason, our own feelings. I'm not saying that. I mean, they should be followed, but within that when I need to interact with someone, for that to be positive, I need to remember that the person has a totally different view than I do, and to try to see that person through him, with his view and needs, and somehow adapt myself to that. I realize that very often it's difficult, not for our inability to see the others also, but often this becomes difficult because we have a kind of attachment, a very strong attachment to our own view of things. You can see this also when there are very strong cultural differences, or when we are with people who have different views. What I realized is that sometimes it's hard to listen to other people, to open ourselves to others, because we're strongly attached to this idea that we're right, which can be very understandable, because once we've found a certain a balance between my feelings and my thoughts and my actions, but but others have their own vision, can be very different. And once our vision is very stable and clear, then sometimes it becomes even more difficult to open up to different views. So two things happen when I'm very insecure and uncertain of my view. It being in front of who or what is different can be frightening, because we're afraid of losing our balance. And on the other side, when we have our point of view that's very established and stable, we close ourselves to seeing anyone else. I remember, for example, the first time that I found myself in front of someone, or when I found myself in front of the theory of the flat, the Earth being flat. I don't know if you've ever, I mean, without even thinking about it for 3 seconds, then you think, oh, don't even, don't make fun of me. I mean, what is that? The Earth being flat. And then I did it, so these they didn't convert me, but I did an exercise, let's say. Well, I I did this kind of exercise. I tried to listen, trying to go beyond my own my own ideas, without losing my own logic, but really just trying to listen to their their logic. I mean, this was one example, and at the same time, with trying not to judge the people, but just trying to understand their view, and and I realized that it's not that easy. At first, when we find ourselves when we find ourselves in front of someone who has an idea that's very different, our tendency is to oppose them, say you're wrong. That's it. Maybe because accepting that the other one may not be right means that we would have to look at our own view, and often we're not up to doing that. But I think it's really important that we're open when we're faced with someone else, that we should really do our best to understand them and not arrive with this kind of block of who's right and who's wrong, and have often we 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 decide who's right or wrong not through any kind of personal direct experience, but through our own attraction or aversion. Often we give someone, say something is right, based on our own attraction. I remember once I had a conversation with a friend, discussion with a friend. It was a friend from the monastery, and we were used to debating, etc., etc. We had kind of a strong discussion about someone. Like, it's not the case to talk about the details, but at a certain point I tried to follow a logical I tried to follow logic, and 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 then at a certain point he said, well, it's useless to debate about it, because it's this person who said this thing, because it actually historically through Tibetan through the Buddhist teachings, for books, for example, the author's name was put always at the end to not create any kind of arrogance in the author himself, but mostly so that the actual reader doesn't make any kind of judgment on the contents. Instead, today, the name of the author is even bigger on the front page than the title of the book. Instead we should do the opposite. First to, you know, surely not to nourish any kind of pride. You that or like I'm the author, or even the opposite. Like, oh, I've taken away the name. I feel more. I have more pride. Be, I feel arrogance. I have arrogance because I'm more humble than you. But what I mean is that when we have a book, or we need to look at the contents and then judge by the contents and not by the author. Even if this often just doesn't happen, when someone tells us something, we should observe what is said independently of who said it. Often I've seen that you know, sometimes you hear people say something, and then people listening say, "Well, who said that?" Okay, independently of who said it, first listen to what was said. Use your experience, your reason, your logic, observe it, and then we can look at who said that thing. Because often we we say something's right or wrong based on our attraction or aversions. This is something quite delicate. Anyway, what I wanted to bring to now, as it often happens, you know, you you've taken one step, now you need to take the next one. So once we've taken a step to go beyond a little bit, this obsession with self-gratification that we talked about last week, this to think about my own needs, what I want, you know, you know, instead we think about our needs. When we're able to open ourselves a little bit towards other, then this is a very, very important step to take. It's marvelous. And the next one would be to observe that we live in a reality that is relative. And as I live reality and the way you live your reality, these are two different worlds. And we need, anyway, I need to adapt myself and my way of acting. And I repeat what I said before. It's not because I have the best of intentions that it is necessarily a positive interaction towards someone else. I can do something with the best of intentions and then in the end do harm. It reminds me of an anecdote that happened in India. Nothing, no, actually in Brazil, actually, we were in São Paulo, and there was a Geshe Losan Tempa was there, and he had come to Brazil to go to a center in Rio de Janeiro, and when he got there, there was a problem where the person who was there was so happy she had opened this center, and she was so happy to invite and receive this geshe. And when he arrived, she went running to him, and she was so emotional that she threw her arms around him to hug him. And this was decades ago, and that geshe was very, very traditional from Tibet. He had never touched anyone. You can imagine, never touched a woman like this. A woman throws her arms around him, and as she was running towards him to hug him, he was walking backwards. He didn't know what to do, and he was walking backwards, and she kept moving forwards to hug him. At the end, and she was very, very upset because she was saying, where's the compassion? You talk about having compassion for all beings, and you can't even hug me because you think that I'm dirty or that I'm impure, you can't touch me. I mean, that wasn't his reason. Anyway, she was very upset, and this was an example of two very different points of view, and they weren't able to understand each other at the moment, and not even later. So anyway, what happened is that center closed, and that geshe found himself on the other side of the world and didn't really have a place to go. So he came to stay at my mother's house in Brazil. And so he was coming to the center, and he was teaching at the center in São Paulo in Brazil. He was there with us, and one day there was also a moment where he didn't even have a translator. One day he was doing a puja where they were serving. I mean, there was this inner offering, and at the time, it's what I have in front of me, and normally we put in a little bit of black tea or a little bit of alcohol, and so he asked for a small glass of alcohol and a small glass of water, and so they come with two glasses, and they brought him a nice big glass of, what do you call it? In Brazil we say coco de rechon. It was a kind of glass that you could eat the kind of like melted cheese inside this glass, and it's just the simplest glass that can be there. And then another glass was very beautiful. And so what did he do? He goes to I can't remember which one it was, but takes one of these glasses. He was very thirsty. He took the glass and he just throws it back to drink. In India, he has this. So he has this habit, like they do this a lot in India. They're able to like open up the throats and they like drink directly without touching, without putting the in the mouth, but instead that was piña. It's kind of like a grappa. It's a strong digestive. So he took, let's say, this very big glass of like pure alcohol. I mean, someone who had never had any alcohol in his life. He was about 60 years old. You can imagine. He had to drink like liters and liters of water. He wasn't able to finish the ceremony. He was like falling asleep. And what happens? The person who put the water in that glass certainly had the best of intentions. I don't think anybody wanted to play a joke on him. Would be a very low-level bad joke. They were trying to offer the best, but the result was very different. This is just a practical example where someone wants to offer the best, but the worst happens. Can happen that someone tries to do something thinking that they're going to help, but instead of helping, it actually creates a lot of problems for someone else. And we can give thousands of examples of things like this. What happens is that on our side, when someone comes to us and does something with a good intention, but instead of helping us somehow creates difficulties, it's important for us to have a lot of patience and to not react towards the other, to open ourselves up to them, because remember that the other one it doesn't have to understand my needs, my thoughts, often someone wants to do something positive for me, but actually hurts me. But the other one, doesn't have to understand how I am. But on my side, I need to try to understand and be patient. I mean, I could tell so many stories about this. Once there was a master of Lama Michel who was in Milan, and someone saw him with old shoes, and they bought him some new shoes, and they brought him the shoes as a gift, and he was very upset. And he said, "Oh, you don't want me here?" Because in the Tibetan culture, when you go somewhere, you take your shoes off. And if they bring you your shoes back to you, what's the message? Go away. There was even once, there's like in the biography of an English person in the end of the in midnight, in 1890, when he walked and was able to get into Lhasa, and he was there with the local army, and then they had like a kind of a ceremony for him. They welcomed him, and and then they offered him tea and everything, and then they said, why, what do you want? Why are you here? And then they brought him some new boots, and they said to him, okay, we give you these shoes so that you can return home comfortably, because you can't go any further. Anyway, he did go further. He ended up being put in prison anyway. But in this tradition, in Tibetan tradition, if you offer shoes to someone, it means that you don't want them, and it can be like refusing of the master. So when this master received these shoes with the best of intentions, but he really was upset at first. But then he said, okay, since this thought doesn't exist in your culture, you didn't have this motivation at all. I accept these shoes. What does this mean? This means that when someone does something, even if they don't know our reality, and they do something that they do something that they think is positive, but in our way of thinking it is negative, we really should try to adapt ourselves to them, and don't expect that that person needs to understand our needs or our ways. Someone can do comment. Someone can make comments about something that to me would be painful without knowing that they're saying something that is hurtful. That happens a lot. So we should try to adapt ourselves to others when we do something for others, and then when the others do things for us, so that we can have more balance. But when we need to do something for someone else, it's very important together with having an intention of love and wanting the well-being of the other, is to try to see the other person, his needs, his worldview. Try to see the other person, to try to interact in a way that will be of most benefit. The first thing, I don't know if it's the first thing, but something that's important in all of this, that it happens also when we need to discuss something with someone, or someone who has a different point of view, which can happen every once in a while, if not every day. What happens is that the first thing is to be able to not be so attached to being right. Be able to see the other and feel that I realize that you have your point of view, I have mine. And try to see each other instead of I try to understand you, and then if you try to understand me, that would be good. But from my side, I try to listen, I try to see, and try to understand the other person. This is something that requires effort. How can I say? It's a constant energy that we need to give. But I think that in the end it really resolves a lot. And it's a little bit, it's like what Rinpoche would call being ego-friendly. Very often Rinpoche would say we need to be ego-friendly. And in being ego-friendly, it was a way of saying, how can I say it? when we talk about being ego-friendly, being friendly with the ego of someone else, it means knowing how to adapt ourselves to the needs and the mentality of the other person, of other people, which is just not easy. It's not simple. We're very ego-friendly with ourselves. And it's not just about doing what the other person wants, etc. But instead, I'm going to repeat one more time, allow ourselves to at least try to see the other person. And when I look at myself and I see in the various situations that I've lived in or my daily life in many different situations, I see how it's not that easy. And it often happens that I find myself I find myself in front of someone that I just don't understand. But the more attached I am to being right, or or that you answered in a way you shouldn't have answered. I mean, the more I try to impose my vision, then the more complicated the situation becomes. Because what happens too is that often we live and perceive the world as if we were at the center of the universe. Why are you like this? What did I do to you? Yeah, not everything depends on you. It's not because I did something or I said something. And so it reminds me of a particular situation that I lived last week that I wasn't able to understand. It seemed kind of bad, and I'm not going to go into the details. It has nothing to do with anybody here or the center. That at a certain point, this situation just changed another time. And I realized that if I had stayed attached to the fact that you said this, or you were wrong, or you didn't do this other thing, at the end, I just wouldn't have been able to move forward. Instead, the exercise of being able to say, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't understand why you acted this way. There are things that I just don't understand, and if you don't want to explain them to me, then that's up to you. You don't have to explain anything to me. You acted in this way because you thought that was the best way to act. It wasn't so great for me, but so just moving forward without instead of going back and this, and why did you answer this way, and you answered badly, and you should have done this, etc. I mean, the more we stay attached to what happened yesterday and how you answered and what you should have done, I mean, the more we suffer, I mean, and we can't go forward. I mean, we're always in constant transformation, and instead it's difficult for us to relate to the present moment because we're grasping to a past image. How can I say? If I've had an experience, like a beautiful experience, it's right that I try to repeat that experience. If I've had a negative experience, I should try to avoid a similar experience. What happens, though, is that, and I'm trying to put it all together. for example, there's a conflict between two people. What's the problem there? The object of the conflict or the fact that there's a conflict? It's the conflict in itself. It's the tension that's created. It's the difficulty that's created. And very often the object of conflict could be resolved very easily. But what generates the suffering and difficulty is the real tension that's created. And if I have this tension, if I feel this tension with you, and I don't want to live that tension anymore, what I try to do, I try to move away from the situation by the place, move away from the place and the person, when instead the problem is not the person, the place, or the situation. And wanting to avoid that keeps us somehow in that conflict. Somehow it becomes really important to not stay attached to the past. In other words, to not be full of resentment, to not keep that bitter taste of what happened that one time and I didn't do and you didn't understand, and here and there, just let it out, go beyond. Each one does his own, does the best that he can within the limits of his own ignorance. Because really, each one really tries to do his best with the resources that he has, that he possesses. I'm sure about this. Someone could say, yes, but you're justifying everything like this. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that even the person who did the worst thing imaginable, if you go to see, he did do it freely, in the sense he did that thing. It's like it's a chain of events, of experiences that happen, starting from his own childhood. So many things that happened that brought him to do that thing and have this way of seeing the world, etc., etc. So, we can say that we're all victim of our own choices, our own interactions. But this doesn't take away that when we do something, we're responsible for the actions that we've done. One thing doesn't take away from the other. But when we see someone else and we judge them, or we try to understand them, if I try to judge your actions through my point of view, my reference point, it's just not going to work. Because if I were you, if I were in your place, I wouldn't have done this, like this, that thing I would have never done. But you're not me. Then if you were me, being me, you probably wouldn't have done much differently. A short time ago, I had a discussion. It was a pleasurable discussion with someone who said to me that, according to him, there is no such thing as free will. Because when someone acts, in reality, that person is acting in that way as a result of a very complex interaction of context, like social, cultural context and experiences lived, etc. Having lived all of that, inevitably he's going to react and act in that way. It's like if you take a child and you raise them in one context, maybe you can raise a child to have a tendency to be a criminal, or and in another context to be a model citizen, and then in another time. And then in Italian, there's this word, it's this ni, which is si and no, yes and no, in the sense that we are strongly influenced, yes. And when we have to choose, we are influenced by our experiences, by our accumulated traumas, even the experiences of our own parents and our own family, our ancestors. This is even in the Buddhist, in the Tibetan Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhism, um, this is acknowledged. These are characteristics that we have that have come, that have been passed down from our parents. They're aspects, that we have that have come from our parents. Even what they lived influences us. It's not that our reality is so easy. That's why it's really, it's so difficult to understand others when it's so difficult to understand ourselves. Anyway, so we have this complexity, in our way of being. We have this complexity, the fact that we're influenced by innumerable factors, but within all of those factors, we still have a freedom. Go or not go, do or not do, say or not say. We apply this every day. We can choose if we want to show that feeling or not. We can choose to do that thing or not. At a certain point, we can. It's very, that space of free will is very, very small, but it exists. And it's applicable in every moment. I'm absolutely sure of that. It's almost as if our freedom isn't absolute in the sense that we could do anything we want, but we have different influences in our lives. And when we find ourselves in front of the situations with the resources that we have, with the past that we have accumulated and everything that we are, we have more than one possibility. And that's where you can find your freedom, our free will. But it's important to see that when someone acts in a certain way, it's the result of all this is a result of this long chain of events, and that this person has lived and brought him to act in that way. But sometimes we make a mistake and we talk about seeing someone else or accepting someone as they are. It's like that we can think that by accepting that person like that, it means that we have to be under that person. But no, it means I see you, I respect you, I respect your way of being, within all of your complexities, everything that has brought you to be who you are. I try to direct you, I try to influence you positively, I try to accompany you, in a way that I think is also the best for you. I don't know if that's clear. Remember that everyone has his own rhythm and his own path, and we can't force anyone. We need to really somehow we need to adapt ourselves to everyone, but without great expectations. I could say, I could say that one of the most ungrateful jobs is try to help others, even on a spiritual level, even more. It's it's not simple, and the time that it takes is very long, you know, to 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 see any kind of results and see someone actually changing, in changing and transforming and helping himself. And I'm not saying that here we need to all be bodhisattvas. Fall, following Mahayana Buddhism, that should be our objective, you know. But you know, we should at least try to do this with the people who are closest to us. And if some would say, "Oh, well, Lama, it's too difficult," yes, but not doing it is easy because it requires no effort. But how much energy do I waste in conflict, and how much energy instead do I use by adapting myself? It's a bit like saying it's not easy to accept, but how much energy do I use up and I waste with being dissatisfied compared to accepting. You know, you're going to use up energy in one way or in another. And in my point of view, we use up much more energy being disappointed or in conflict compared to accepting or adapting. You know, when two or more people come together, it seems more difficult to find a meeting point, a point of harmony. Trying to adapt ourselves to the other could seem like it takes up a lot more energy, but actually, the energy used up by conflict would be much greater compared to adapting and looking for a meeting point. So let's start with the people who are closest to us. This is important. In any case, having said all of this, I believe that in any case we need to act in every moment. Obviously, how can I say? You know, limited by our own being. Let me explain myself better. I can't expect from myself to act. I can't expect myself to act like an enlightened being. Right now, I can interact and try to have people interact with me with the basis of who and where I am, on the basis of my own ignorance and my limits. So if I try to adapt myself in the best way to the others, or to see the needs of others, or to go beyond that I think that I'm right, remembering that often, you know, the problem between two people is not the actual object of discussion, but it's the fact that each one wants to be right, wants to impose being right onto the other, and it's just exhausting. Even if I can't somehow have the certainty to be acting perfectly, even if I try to adapt myself to the other person, opening myself up, I'm going to be following my perception, my logic, and that what I think is the right thing in my whole, and the choices we make and the words that we speak and what we do, having taken into consideration others, with sincerity. I tried to understand you in the best way possible. We've observed our own needs, our intentions, you know, and we've we've acted, with a good intention that corresponds to our feelings and thoughts, and then we just go forward. I mean, we need to have that reference point. I mean, surely it's not going to be perfect, in my choices, I'm far from being perfect. I see, you know, that the times that I have been able to act with an inner coherence where when I took into consideration others and doing the best, within with my own abilities in understanding and in acting, then I just go forward, without any kind of sense of guilt or anything, because even if there are some negative results, because you know, without any. So, I mean, to not have any negative side effects among the interaction among people means it is interacting without any kind of mental defilements. But it's when there's someone with a lot of attachment, the other one was full of fear, and the other one is very angry, and the other one is nervous, and the other one is full of envy, then there's will always be this conflict. The other day I was talking with Geshe Losam Phuntsok, who's here, and we were talking about, and he said, because when this Geshe who lives in Mongolia he came here, and he saw that we live with many people close, and we're not that few. I mean, they're people very close. And he said, how can Lama Danshan do in Mongolia? I'm there, there's just a few people around me that I have to interact with, and there are always problems. And it's, here, I mean, why one person's problem finishes and another one starts, without talking about when they all just overlap. Rinpoche would often say, you know, and I've experienced something similar, and I'm not complaining. Rinpoche said that when he would practice Tonglen, he would constantly, he'd say that between here and here is the Tong, because he would hear the complaint, he would listen to, he would hear the negativity and always try to say something positive. So he's doing the Tonglen between his ear and his mouth. So what happens is that when we have to deal with more people, then there'll be the higher probability of encountering problems. It's normal. Today somebody's sick, tomorrow somebody's not well, so tomorrow someone is sad, and then there's someone who has someone close has died, and then someone has problems at work. And today I heard lots of problems. I've heard so many problems today. And this is just part of life. There's not a moment where everything just goes fine. And from my experience is that even when you're trying to do your best, everyone everyone lives the result of his own karma. And karma means the result of one's own choices. We could be living together with Buddha in person. I mean, just look at Devadatta, who was the Buddha's cousin. And no matter how close he was to him, I mean, he even tried to kill him. Not metaphorically, I mean, he really tried physically to kill him. He was going past, he tried to push a big boulder down. Another time he poisoned him. I mean, there were different times he tried to kill Buddha, but he was never able. Okay. It made me think of that cartoon where there's there's always there was the wolf that was always trying to get the other one, and then was always hurting himself, and it could never get him. It was the roadrunner. So Devadatta was always trying to hurt Buddha, and never was able, but was only hurting himself. So it means that someone could be very close to Buddha, but doesn't have the merits and hasn't created the causes. And we won't have those results. It's also said that one example that's given, I mean, there's certain situations where a being hasn't created the causes to have a state of well-being, even if he's together with others who have that similar experience or have the basis for that experience. That being doesn't have that same experience. An example that's given is that there are certain beings who are called, for example, like hungry ghosts. And even when they find themselves with a lot of thirst, so what we see as water, they see it as blood and pus. I mean, they're not able to perceive that thing that could take away their thirst. And it's said that each type of being has a different way of seeing. I mean, the way I see water and the way a fish sees water is already different. And sometimes, for one, depending on the context, something can bring a result for one and a different result for somebody else. So, so it can be that we're in a situation where for some people it's something marvelous, and for another it feels like hell. It depends also on our ability, and depends on one's own inner cycle, and like how that person is living that experience. This reminds me of Rinpoche, who helped so many people in so many different ways. And when I saw him heal sick people in a marvelous way. And he said, I've seen people get close to Rinpoche, get sick, and then the sickness would just develop and not stop. And people would say, how come Rinpoche healed this person and not that person? Didn't love that person enough? He didn't try enough? And even once talking to Rinpoche, he said, healing is nothing other than an interaction. So for healing to come, there needs to be a relationship, a kind of a connection. It's called a karmic connection between who heals and who is healed. That's also why within the Tibetan Buddhism, when someone looks for a doctor, it's said that it doesn't depend only on the technical knowledge of the doctor, but one needs to look for a doctor with whom one has a good connection. Maybe a doctor has a lot less experience and knowledge, but finds the right point, and it depends also on this connection that they have with the doctor, the patient doctor. Or there's also the fact that the person is living a certain karmic cycle, and until that cycle finishes, that the healing can't be fully applied. So the healing is depends on this interaction. So often we can even do our best to try to understand the others, trying to adapt ourselves, but this this doesn't mean that we are able to heal the other. I mean, the best that we can do is try to interact in the best way that we can, really trying to do our best. This is important. And when we do what we think is really the best, and little by little we try, every once in a while we're indifferent, or we're taken by our own arrogance, or sometimes we're taken by this attachment to being right, or aversion, etc., etc. And as we, little by little, we realize these things, we should try to redirect ourselves. But if we give ourselves the time and the space to observe and direct ourselves to react with this awareness, then we really do our best, and then it will be what it will be. And so then we can't just be upset that the other one was upset, and we don't have the full control over how things are going to be, or we don't have at all control over how things then evolve. But the main point today is about the importance from our side to adapt ourselves, to see the other person, at least try to see the other person. And I talked about this a little bit last week. And I see, like on different levels. It's not something that obvious, because we start by seeing the other person, by starting by seeing his needs, and saying, okay, your happiness is as important to me as my own. And the next step is trying to understand that you have a worldview that is different than my own, and when I interact with you, I need to adapt myself to you, and not that you need to come and adapt yourself to me. Is that clear? Now, last week we did a short meditation that I want to repeat today. This is a meditation that I think is very important, and it's good to talk, to reflecting, etc., etc. That's good, but it's important also for us to meditate, to generate this inner experience, even with visualization. And in the practice today, we're here at the first step. We don't need to actually understand someone else, but it's something very, very simple what we need to do. We need to imagine the other person, and just imagine that person happy. Imagine that the other person is fine, and feel joy for that. It's really easy. It's not very complicated. My advice that for this practice that we're going to do together, we just don't do it for all sentient beings. Let's just choose one. As I explained last week, there are 3 levels, with less and more courage. So I choose, if I choose the person, the hardest one would be, I need the most courage if I want to choose the person for whom I have the most aversion and problems, and then, or someone for whom I have indifference, or let's say the least amount of courage required is choosing someone that we have attraction for, or that we have love for, If we see that, for example, if we choose someone we have aversion for, and we really can't generate that feeling of love, and for that person, then we should choose an easier subject, let's say, someone for whom we have indifference or love. Okay, so now sit down in a comfortable position. back straight but not tense. With our shoulders relaxed. The awareness on our breath. And we bring our attention to our nostrils and the air that comes in and the air that goes out. We breathe in. And we exhale. We visualize at the center of our heart, at our heart chakra, a point of light. That little by little expands. Point of light like the sun. As it expands, we feel this inner feeling of wellness. Our knots, our inner knots melt. Our tension melts. We relax body and mind. the space in front of us. We visualize someone. When we choose. Just breathe in. And breathe out. It's the point of light that our heart expands, goes beyond our own body, touches the person in front of us like rays of light that warm us up on a cold day. So in the middle of this darkness, these rays of light come and touch this person in front of us. Gradually relaxes, goes beyond his or her tension, sadness. These rays of light bring love and wisdom, and gradually that person that in front of us starts to smile. Reaching an inner state of peace, satisfaction. We breathe in. We breathe out. We allow ourselves to say to the other person that his or her happiness is as important to us as our own. We feel it. And we deeply desire that he or she is happy. These light rays bring wellness and happiness. The other person smiles, bringing gradually a state of great wellness. Breathe in. Breathe out. The other person smiles at us. And these light rays gradually come back to us, and they reabsorb at our own heart. We feel a deep sense of joy. In seeing and feeling the joy of the other. Inhale. And exhale. Inhale. And exhale. Little by little, we allow this light to expand beyond the person in front of us. It goes towards all other beings. We start with one person, and little by little we expand, allowing ourselves to desire the happiness of everyone. The light rays come back and they absorb into our heart. We experience an inner feeling of joy, stability, an inner state of peace. Inhale and exhale. Sarabtenche Nakaratile Chojuragapatang
Losan tempe drenme sasum ki drove musela tautu ne gyuru chi kewa kuntu yanda lamadang dralme cheki pela longche ching sadan lamge yunten rabzo ne dorje change kopang nyur tobe sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delekshin nintsen takto delekpe koncho sumke jingilo koncho sumke ngodrobot sol koncho sumke trashishun. Prima di concludere, volevo solo ricordare due cosettine.
Remind you of two things. One is that there's so much that we can do from our side with our thoughts, with our practice, our meditation, etc. And at the same time, there's a need that we have that is more coarse, that should be respected. You know, the places where we are, the people we meet. So I invite all of you, within the limits of your own possibilities, is to be a little bit in silence, in nature. This is important because at a certain point we get to a point where we get into certain dynamics, you know, and one just gets used to these negative dynamics. Yesterday I had to go to Milan, and it was a while that I hadn't been there, and I could smell the smells of the city, and I just wasn't used to it anymore. It's not exactly, there's not beautiful scents, let's say, and in other aspects too, you know, without going on too long, but that when you're always there, you just don't see. It seems normal, but it doesn't mean that you don't experience the negative effects of that. So it's important to get out of this closed in environment, and then as much as we can given the situation, but being in open spaces with nature, being in contact with nature is very, very important for all of us. And also also try to interact with others positively, because I see also in the big cities is that at the end that everyone is so busy with themselves. You know, I'm talking on a very coarse level. You know, people are so taken with themselves that it's difficult to see the others, even have time to say hello. So we need to really try to get away from these kind of dynamics. And having said that, yesterday when I was in Milan, and I did these errands I had to do, and then I went to the Kunpen at a certain point, and inside it was like walking into a kind of refuge, as heaven, and seeing that I saw again, not so conceptually, but I just felt just how important that place is to so many people, and now as soon as it's possible, you know, according to restrictions, red, orange, yellow, you know, as soon as it's possible, we will open the activities again. This is, I think it's so important for all of you who are in Milan, and you know, it's really it's a priority for me to go back to Milan and to do the Wednesdays, um, the Kunpen there in Milan. I think this is just really important, and I just wanted to end with this. I thank you all today also because for me, what gives meaning to me is being able to share, be able to interact virtuously and positively with each other. This is important also for me. That's all for today. That's time for our last dedications.
pa nyurtu nele tarkyur chi drowe nini malyo pa taktu chungwa me prasho menam tudan demba dan sanga dejo druba yi kandro simbo la so pa ninje semdan dengyur chi chona kuina ludan sim dunga neba chinye pa teda dagi sonam ki tega gyatso to parasho in tutte le direzioni, qualunque corpo o mente, malato o sofferente che ci sia, possano essi, tramite i poteri dei nostri meriti, raggiungere un oceano di felicità e benessere. Nimo dele tsendele, nime kuyan dele kshin, Nyensen takto delek pe, koncho sumke jingelo, koncho sumke ngodrubo sol, koncho sumke trashisho. All'alba o al tramonto, di notte o durante il giorno, possano i tre gioielli concederci le loro benedizioni, possano aiutarci ad ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e cospargere i sentieri della nostra vita con molti segni di buon auspicio. Grazie a tutti.